Ma'am, I need you to come down right now. The HOA president has filed a trespassing complaint. Those were the first words out of Deputy Eli Moreno's mouth as he stood at the bottom of Paige Bennett's porch steps, one hand resting near his radio mic, the other holding a small notepad already bent from use. Red and blue light rolled over her gravel drive in slow pulses, washing the cedar posts, the stacked split oak by the rail, and the old metal wind chime her grandfather had hung before she was born. At 7:14 on a dry Tuesday morning, Willow Pine Shores had managed to put on a full parade for one woman drinking coffee in her own chair. Karen Langford stood half a step behind the deputy and fully in front of everyone else's patients. Pearls at sunrise, oversized sunglasses despite the porch being shaded, wide-brimmed hat pinned over a hairspray stiff bob that did not move even when the breeze moved everything else. Her white clipboard was tucked against her chest like a sheriff's badge she had awarded herself. And she had parked her golf cart by Paige's mailbox at an angle that looked less like parking and more like staging. The little laminated HOA placard on the windshield gleamed as if it carried federal authority. Paige did not stand. She sat with one boot heel tucked under the rocker, the other foot planted on the porch board her grandfather had hand-cut in 1971, and lifted her mug just enough to drink before she answered. Deputy, this porch is part of Parcel 11B, recorded in my name and grandfathered before that HOA plat existed. Her voice came out level, clear, and almost gentle. You're standing at the steps my granddad framed in 71, and I refinished these rails after my husband passed. I'm not trespassing. Karen leaned forward, manicured nails clicking fast against the clipboard's edge. She is obstructing community land standards and refusing emergency compliance, she said loudly, like volume could substitute for land records. That dead tree is a hazard under Section 12. She's ignored notices. She is on controlled community space. Deputy Moreno glanced from Karen to Paige, then up at the porch as if maybe the boards would vote on jurisdiction. He looked young enough that his jaw still held some soft edges, but his expression was professional and careful. Ms. Bennett, I need to verify what's going on. Could you come down so we can sort this out? Paige tipped the mug again, black coffee gone lukewarm while the morning warmed around it. She could smell red clay dust, hot engine from the patrol SUV, and the faint, sweet rot of leaves near the well house. I'm happy to talk from right here, she said. I'm not armed. I'm not leaving my porch because someone with a clipboard doesn't know the county map. Karen made a sharp sound through her nose, halfway between a laugh and a snort. Listen to that. Defiant. This is exactly the behavior I documented. She flipped a page with theatrical force. You have had 2 notices, 1 certified demand, and a final warning regarding hazardous vegetation. We have authority to abate. Over your own lots, Paige said, not over mine. A second deputy, older and broader through the shoulders, stepped out of the passenger side and stopped near the front fender, letting the younger one manage first contact. He watched without interrupting, scanning the fence line, the tree line, Karen, then Paige. He looked like a man measuring where a call was headed before he picked a side of the road to stand on. Karen pointed toward the side yard with the flat palm of someone presenting evidence in court. The oak is dead. Completely dead. It threatens pedestrian safety and hydrant visibility. We are here because she is non-compliant and combative. Paige followed Karen's gesture with her eyes. From this angle, she could see the upper limbs of the post oak over the roofline. Some leaves browned early, branch tips thinned where spring should have pushed growth. The sight still struck her in a place she kept private. That tree had shaded her during summer CPR drills when she came home from Army service and had no idea what to do with quiet. That tree had stood over her husband's folding chair during the bad months, when he sat wrapped in a blanket and watched dusk settle over the pasture grass. It had never been decor. It had been witness. Deputy Moreno shifted his weight and kept his tone even. Ms. Langford, let's let her answer one at a time. Ms. Bennett, do you have documentation available? Karen snapped. She's had months. She refuses to comply because she believes she's above the neighborhood. Paige looked straight at the deputy, not at Karen. I keep records for a living. Yes, I have documentation. That line landed and held for a second. Karen's chin tilted. Records for a living? She trims trees for cash and thinks that makes her exempt. Paige set the mug on the little cedar table beside the rocker, the one scarred by weather rings and one old burn mark from a soldering iron. Retired Army medic, she said. Now county-certified arborist consultant, 52 years old. 14.6 acres inherited, deeded, and outside your HOA jurisdiction. I've filed my boundary survey with county planning twice in the last 3 years. Once when your subdivision was approved, and again when your board mailed me fiction. The older deputy looked up at that. You filed directly with planning? Stamped copies in a binder 20 feet from where I'm sitting. Karen laughed with tight lips. This is exactly her tactic, deputy. She floods us with paper and refuses standards. Paige gave her a calm glance, brief as a weather check. Paper is how property lines work. The neighborhood had started waking now. A garage door hummed in the distance. A dog barked twice and stopped. Someone across the road paused a jog to watch from the shoulder, then thought better of it and moved on. The red and blue flashes kept sliding over the gravel and fence posts like a warning no one had earned, except the person making the accusation. Karen took one step toward the stairs and raised her voice another notch. Community land standards apply to all affected properties within the visual corridor. She cannot keep a dead hazard where children can see it from the park path. There were no children on that path at this hour, just dew and silence. Paige felt the old familiar pressure at the back of her neck. The one that used to come in triage tents when 10 people were talking at once and none of them were bleeding the way they claimed. She breathed once, slow, and let the moment pass without heat. Deputy, she said, if this were about safety, she would have called county code first, not 911. If this were about jurisdiction, she would have brought a survey, not a dress code. The older deputy coughed into his fist to hide what might have been a laugh. Moreno's mouth twitched and reset. Karen's face went bright under the lipstick. I am the elected president of Willow Pine Shores HOA, and this woman is interfering with lawful emergency action on HOA emergency property. Paige finally leaned forward in her rocker, elbows on her knees, hands loose. Still no raised voice. Still no hurry. You keep saying emergency property like repeating it makes it true. It doesn't. Moreno lifted a hand, trying to settle both sides. All right, everybody breathe. Ms. Bennett, if you've got documents we can review. Ms. Langford, I need the exact basis for trespass on your complaint form. Karen thrust the clipboard toward him and tapped a highlighted line with one manicured nail. Unauthorized occupation of HOA, governed easement corridor, and refusal to vacate. Paige watched the deputy read it, watched his brow draw in half a centimeter, watched his eyes flick from the phrase to her porch and then toward the well house beyond the side fence. She knew that look. It was the first crack in certainty. The instant a professional realized he might have been handed a story trimmed to fit someone's agenda. She reached for her coffee again, took a measured sip, and sat back into the slow creak of cedar slats. She did not flinch. She did not stand. She did not offer anger where facts would do better work. Karen started again, louder. She has ignored every compliance effort, and she will not cooperate with hazard abatement under community land standards. Paige turned her head just enough to meet the deputy's eyes and said, "If we're finally ready for standards, I can bring out the county survey, the camera logs, and the service agreement your entire entrance irrigation loop depends on." For the first time that morning, Karen stopped talking mid-breath. The golf cart idled by the mailbox. The lights kept turning over the gravel, and what happened next would shake Willow Pine Shores to its roots. Now, hold up. The porch stayed quiet for a beat so clean it almost rang. And that was the moment to pause, because the sentence Paige had just spoken was not something a person pulled out in panic. It was something she had carried for years, folded and dated and filed in the same careful way. She packed trauma kits in the Army. Nothing loose, nothing assumed, nothing left to chance. Karen's mouth had stopped mid-lecture. Deputy Moreno had narrowed his eyes toward the side fence, and even the older deputy by the fender had shifted his stance like he had just heard the first real fact of the morning. If Paige had been telling this across a kitchen table instead of living it on her porch, this was the point where she would have leaned in and said, "Let me take you back to how this started." She had no taste for drama, but she understood sequence. People saw a calm woman in work boots and decided she was passive. They saw a gravel drive and cedar rails and thought old place, easy target. Easy. What they did not see was the structure underneath. And that structure mattered more than tone, volume, or a clipboard held like a warrant. And yes, if she were talking straight to the folks listening, this is where she would add, "Hey everyone, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments." Then she would tap the table once and get back to the point, because this story might have sounded like small-town nonsense from the outside. But it had records, dates, signatures, and enough hard edges to cut through a whole board of manufactured authority. Paige Bennett was 52 that Tuesday morning, broad-shouldered from years of hauling gear and feed sacks, with the kind of steady hands people trusted when things got bad. She had spent 20 years as an Army medic, then came home and built a second career as a county-certified arborist consultant after she learned, in the long quiet after service, that triage and tree care had one thing in common. If you missed early signs, the damage multiplied. She did not advertise much. Most of her work came by word of mouth from ranchers, schools, and one church that had 3 old pecans no one wanted to lose. She had never joined Willow Pine Shores, never signed its covenants, and never accepted its jurisdiction. Her parcel sat adjacent, not inside, grandfathered under county records before the first subdivision brochure ever printed. 14.6 acres, parcel 11B, conveyed through family trust and corrected survey. Then refiled when the subdivision infrastructure went in, then refiled again when the HOA started mailing glossy reminders to people who had not authorized them. She had stamped copies in 2 binders and digital scans on 2 separate drives. She believed in backups because she had once watched one bad assumption cost a life. The land itself had a memory older than the subdivision gates. Her grandfather, Earl Bennett, bought the place in 1968 when the road was still packed dirt and spring floods cut ruts you could lose a tire in. He framed the porch in 1971 with cedar he milled 1 county over, set the well house on a poured pad with his own hands, and planted windbreak pines in a line so straight you could sight down them like fence wire. When Paige was 8, he taught her to count years in tree rings using a storm-felled limb and a pocket knife. "Slow growth makes strong wood," he told her, tapping each ring. "Fast and flashy looks good in a catalog, but it doesn't hold." By the second week of June in 1986, she was old enough to run irrigation checks before school. and she learned the place by sound as much as sight. Pump kick at the well house, chain rattle on the east gate, morning doves at first light, the low groan of cedar boards in dry heat. That post oak by the well house had been the center marker for all of it. Earl called it the anchor tree, not because it was pretty, though it was, but because it held soil when spring runoff tried to peel the yard open, and because it threw a wide square of afternoon shade where people could sit, think, and breathe. Her parents were gone by the time she was 10, a highway wreck on a wet night nobody in town forgot. And Earl raised her with a kind of plain discipline that never needed speeches. You fixed what you could fix. You documented what you couldn't fix yet. You stayed polite and stood your ground. That combination settled into her bones early. It was why she could face shouting without flinching, and it was why she never confused silence with surrender. Years later, after deployments and training ranges and the clipped cadence of military medicine, she came home for good and tried to relearn ordinary life. She married Thomas Bennett, a high school shop teacher with patient eyes and a laugh you could hear from the barn. They refinished the kitchen cabinets, rewired the old pump monitor, and painted the well house door the same faded green Earl had used in the 70s. They sat under the oak most evenings in 2 metal chairs that always leaned a little uneven on the dirt. Nothing fancy, just theirs. When Thomas got sick, it came in stages that taught time a different shape. First 6 months were appointments and optimism. Next 9 were treatment calendars pinned beside the pantry, and nights measured by medication alarms. The final stretch, nearly half a year, was quiet and careful and full of hard grace. He sat under that same oak wrapped in a blanket, while Paige checked his pulse with fingers that had done it 1,000 times in other places. He told her once, voice thin but steady, "You keep this place alive. Promise me you keep it yours." She promised. She kept that promise the way some people keep religion. 3 days after his funeral, she was out before sunrise with a soil probe and notebook, because grief in motion hurt less than grief standing still. She began cataloging every mature tree on the parcel. Species, crown spread, root flare condition, drip line compaction, irrigation pattern, storm stress markers. It started as survival and became vocation. County extension agents noticed her reports were clean and specific. A retired consulting forester mentored her through certification prep. She passed the county arborist exam on the first attempt and took contracts that let her stay close to home. Her files became their own landscape. Yellow tabs for legal documents, blue for survey overlays, green for tree health histories, red for incidents and third-party contact. In one metal drawer near the kitchen desk, she kept originals she almost never touched. Earl's deed transfer into trust, the probate order after his death, the corrected legal description for Parcel 11B, the licensed utility corridor exhibits tied to the well house. She was not paranoid. She was prepared, and those were different things. In late March of 2019, Mr. Harden, her family attorney with a scratchy voice and suspenders older than most law clerks, sat at her kitchen table and slid a fresh folder across the wood. "You need this recorded copy in the house, not just at my office," he said. "People get loud when they think paper is optional." Paige skimmed the pages and stopped at the exhibit map where the old service corridor ran like a narrow vein from her permitted system toward the track that would become Willow Pine Shores. "This still active?" she asked. Harden nodded once. "Licensed and revocable under conditions. Keep that sentence in your pocket." She did. By early autumn that same year, survey flags appeared on the old pasture beyond her south fence. Then graders, then utility crews, then billboard renderings of smiling families beside a fabricated pond. Willow Pine Shores arrived in phases, each one wrapped in marketing words like exclusive and curated and lifestyle forward. Paige mostly stayed out of it. She hauled brush, consulted on municipal shade plans, and kept her side of the fence mowed clean. She waved when neighbors waved. She did not attend ribbon cuttings. What mattered in this pause, standing mentally between the porch standoff and everything that had led to it, was simple and non-negotiable. Paige's authority did not come from personality. It came from stewardship. It came from years on that soil, years in uniform, years documenting what she touched. The same house her grandfather framed, the same yard her husband sat in through the hardest season of their marriage, the same well house linked to agreements other people benefited from while pretending she was incidental. So when Karen Langford heard service agreement your entire entrance irrigation loop depends on, she heard, maybe for the first time in 3 years, the sound of a limit she had not planned for. Karen had built her posture on the assumption that Paige was isolated, outdated, and easy to pressure. She had never verified the deeper map, never asked the county the second question, never considered that the quiet woman in a cedar rocker might be the one holding the switchboard for half the subdivision's polished landscaping theater. Back on the porch, with patrol lights still sliding across gravel and dew burning off the rail tops, Paige kept her expression even and her shoulders loose. Deputy Moreno still held Karen's complaint form. The older deputy still watched the fence line. Karen still had her clipboard, pearls, and morning certainty, but certainty had begun to crack at the edges. Paige could feel the shift not in the shouting, but in the silence between shouts. She set her mug down on the scarred cedar table, palms open on her knees for one measured breath, and prepared to start at the beginning in the only language that ever settled disputes on that road. Names, dates, and paper. She looked at Deputy Moreno and spoke as if she were giving dosage instructions in a crowded aid station, steady and exact. If you're writing this down, start with 1984. Wet highway on Route 19. My parents died before dawn, and my grandfather raised me here from that day forward. Karen opened her mouth, but Paige lifted one finger, not rude, just firm. You wanted basis. That's basis. This isn't decorative land to me. The older deputy by the fender watched her for a second, then gave a small nod to Moreno that meant, let her finish. Paige's eyes shifted past them to the well house, and memory came with the smell of creosote posts after rain. At 10 years old, she had stood barefoot on this same porch in a borrowed t-shirt, while neighbors spoke in hushed voices by the gate, their truck engines idling because nobody knew what to do with children and bad news before sunrise. Earl Bennett had walked up the steps without drama, knelt until they were eye level, and said, "You and me now, kiddo. We'll keep the place right." He did not promise easy. He promised work, and work held. He taught her how to grease the pump motor, how to reset a tripped breaker, how to sharpen a chain without taking too much tooth, and how to stop talking when someone louder was trying to pull you into their storm. By the spring, she turned 12. He had added a narrow bench inside the well house so she could sit with her school books while he ran line checks. The post oak threw a square of shade over the door by noon, and she used to press her back against the trunk with a pencil and quiz cards, listening to the low thrum of water pressure in the pipes beneath her feet. Earl called that tree the anchor because its roots held the bank when runoff came hard. But she learned later it anchored people too. When the house felt too big after bedtime, she would slip outside and stand under those branches until her breathing matched the wind moving through leaves. Moreno kept writing. Karen shifted weight in her expensive flats and tapped her clipboard, impatient now that the story had history in it. Paige did not look at her. "Fast forward," she said. "Army, 2 decades. I came home, married Thomas Bennett, and we rebuilt this place one project at a time." Her mouth softened for the first time that morning. He taught shop at the high school and fixed everybody's fence latches for free because he couldn't stand a gate that didn't close clean. She rubbed her thumb against her palm once, a small motion, then continued. When he got sick, that oak became our evening room. She was back in that season for a moment, hearing oxygen hiss and summer cicadas running loud in the tree line. Thomas had sat in a folding chair under the oak with a gray blanket over his knees, even in warm weather, because treatment had put cold in his bones that July heat could not reach. Some evenings, he managed one lap to the well house and back. Some evenings, he just watched the sky turn copper over the pasture, while Paige marked medication times on a yellow legal pad. She never lied to him, and he never asked for pity. Near the end of the second year, voice rough and thin, he touched the arm of his chair and said, "You keep this place ours, Paige. Don't let committees name what they didn't build." She had answered, "I promise," and he had nodded like she had signed something binding. 3 weeks after his funeral, she was up at 5:10 a.m. with a soil probe and field notebook, because stillness in the house was worse than work in the yard. The oak was leafing out then, strong and full, and she recorded crown density and root flare depth with the same discipline she used in triage notes overseas. Routine kept grief from scattering. She cataloged every mature tree on the parcel, marked storm scars, tracked irrigation variants, and learned to read stress in bark the way she had once read stress in pulse and skin tone. That practice turned into certification, contracts, a second career built quiet and honest. She kept the land alive because she loved it, and she measured it because love without records was easy for other people to dismiss. Karen finally cut in, voice sharpened to a point. "Deputy, with respect, bereavement is not a legal exemption from hazard compliance." She said compliance like scripture. Paige turned toward her with the same expression she used for stubborn stump rot. "Correct," she said. "But ownership is, jurisdiction is, trespass is." Then she looked back to Moreno. "You asked why I said what I said. That tree is where my grandfather taught me to hold a wrench. It is where my husband sat through cancer. Someone doesn't get to kill that tree and invoice me for the privilege." The older deputy's pen appeared from his shirt pocket, and he started his own notes. The morning had climbed another notch by then, sunlight touching the top rail of the porch and the patrol hood warming under it. A mourning dove landed on the fence and bobbed its head, unconcerned with clipboards and accusations. Paige took one breath and grounded herself in details she could prove. "I can walk you through the full chain," she said. "It starts when Willow Pine Shores went in, and at first it looked neighborly enough." Karen gave a quick, triumphant little nod, as if that opening line validated her whole performance. She did not notice the qualifier. By late October of 2019, the subdivision had paved its main loop and installed decorative lanterns at both entrances, and the first contact came in a cream envelope tucked under Paige's gate latch. "Welcome packet," printed on heavy paper, signed by the board with a cheerful line about shared community values and beautification cooperation. It included holiday lighting suggestions for properties visible from common roads, a voluntary paint palette card, and a handwritten note saying they hoped to build good relationships with adjacent landowners. Paige had stood at her kitchen counter, read it twice, and set it in a folder labeled HOA Courtesy. She did not join. She did not argue. She mailed back a short letter thanking them for the information and reminding them Parcel 11B was non-member, grandfathered, and outside covenant control. Copy retained. Certified receipt stapled. 2 weeks later, Karen Langford arrived in daylight with a tray of store-bought muffins and the same white clipboard she carried now. Back then, the volume was lower and the smile was practiced. "I just wanted to introduce myself properly," she said on the porch, wide-brimmed hat casting a neat oval shadow over red lipstick too bright for 8 a.m. "We're trying to maintain standards everyone can be proud of." Paige offered iced tea because that was how Earl had taught her to handle neighbors, and they sat under the porch fan while Karen talked about mailbox uniformity, seasonal flags, and preserving property values through consistency. Paige listened, then answered in short sentences. "I respect upkeep. I maintain mine. I'm not under HOA authority." Karen's smile held, but one manicured nail tapped the clipboard every time Paige said authority. In January, after a week of hard rain, Karen sent a friendly reminder about fence coloration, visible from the park path. Paige walked the fence line herself in mud-caked boots, took date-stamped photos, and replied that weathered cedar was original and compliant with county code. Karen answered with a second note thanking her for prompt response and attaching a pamphlet titled Visual Harmony Initiative. Still civil, still papered in courtesy. Paige filed both pages and kept mending storm-fallen limbs along her north line, choosing peace where peace was offered. By the second week of March 2020, the HOA board requested a brief meeting at the entrance monument to discuss shared drainage concerns. Paige went because drainage mattered and because she believed most conflicts could be prevented by two adults standing over a map at the same time. Karen arrived in pearls and sunglasses despite gray skies, accompanied by a landscaping contractor in a polo shirt with a clipboard of his own. They talked swales, culvert capacity, and runoff from heavy spring storms. Paige pointed out the historical channel that crossed near her south boundary and offered copies of older contour notes Earl had kept in a coffee tin. Karen thanked her in front of everyone, called her a valuable local resource, and asked if Paige would consider occasional arborist input for common area trees at standard consulting rates. Paige agreed to review one list, nothing more. For a while, it stayed workable. Karen emailed before sending anyone near the fence. Paige responded within a day, factual and brief. The board accepted two of her recommendations about soil compaction around young maples by the playground, and she accepted that people new to rural land often confused neatness with health. She even allowed the HOA's holiday charity run to place directional signs along the county shoulder near her gate for 6 hours, provided they were removed by dusk. They were removed by dusk. On paper, it looked like cooperation done right. Then the edges started hardening in ways polite language could not hide. Karen's reminders arrived more often and referenced visual corridor obligations that did not exist in any county filing Paige had ever seen. A volunteer committee member took photos over Paige's fence slats and described them as routine neighborhood documentation. Karen began ending emails with lines like, "We trust all nearby stakeholders will align with standards to avoid formal action." Paige answered each one with the same calm structure. Jurisdiction declined, boundary reaffirmed, communication in writing only. No heat, no insults, just record. One Saturday morning in early May, Karen pulled up in her golf cart while Paige was mulching around the well house lilacs and announced, "We've had multiple complaints about a sick tree creating a blight impression at the entrance approach." She said blight impression as if she were citing statute. Paige stood, wiped her hands on her work pants, and asked, "Which tree specifically?" Karen pointed at the post oak beyond the fence and said, "That one is in visible decline and may constitute shared hazard exposure." Paige looked at the crown, saw mild tip stress after a dry spell, and said, "I evaluate trees for a living. That oak is under observation, not failure." Karen's nostrils flared. Observation is not compliance. What made the betrayal sting was not that Karen disagreed. It was that she had accepted help, accepted courtesy, accepted practical cooperation, and then recast all of it as leverage the minute Paige refused submission. The same woman who had thanked her over drainage maps now spoke like she could annex a family history with stationery. The same board that had asked for arborist input now treated the anchor tree as a line item in enforcement theater. Paige felt the old medic steadiness settle in, that clear internal click when assessment turned into plan. She would stay polite. She would stay exact. And from that day forward, every contact, every photo angle, every timestamp, every name went into the red tab incident file. On the porch, with deputies listening and Karen trying to recover control of the scene, Paige rested her hand beside her cooling mug and finished in a tone so even it almost sounded kind. That was the beginning, not the dead tree, not this call-out. The beginning was when neighborly language turned into jurisdiction cosplay. Karen snapped, "That is outrageous." But the word landed flat. Moreno looked down at his notepad, then back at her. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I want the dates and copies in order." Paige nodded once. "You'll get them in order." Karen lifted her clipboard again as if she could overwrite the request. "Deputy, she is filibustering. This is a simple enforcement action." Moreno did not look at her. "Miss Bennett, bring what you've got." Paige rose from the rocker without hurry, crossed the porch, and disappeared through the screen door. Karen shifted on the gravel, jaw tight, sunglasses still on, though the sun sat high enough now to throw clean light across the drive. The older deputy watched the golf cart, the mailbox, the side fence, then the porch steps, patient as fence post stone. When Paige came back, she carried one thick binder with red tabs and one thinner folder sealed in a clear sleeve. She set both on the cedar table, turned the binders so Moreno could read the labels, and opened to the first incident sheet. "This is Karen Langford's contact pattern," she said. "Dates, messages, photos, and responses. If I state it, I can show it." Karen gave a short, brittle laugh. "You are not conducting a hearing." Paige flipped to a printed email with color-coded highlights. "No, ma'am. Just chronology." She started with Karen's first month as HOA president, when the smiles were still polished and the demands were wrapped in gift language. Karen had shown up in that same wide-brimmed hat, pearls bright against a pressed blouse, and oversized sunglasses that stayed on from driveway to porch. She arrived by golf cart even when the road was clear enough for a pickup, because the cart carried the laminated HOA badge on the windshield, and made an entrance of authority before she said a word. She tapped a manicured nail against a white clipboard while she spoke, always in little metronome clicks when someone disagreed with her. She used phrases like community expectation and standards framework, then waved away questions about county filings as if facts were optional accessories. On one visit, she had stood beside Paige's well house gate at 8:03 a.m., lipstick too red for morning, and announced, "People driving in should see visual unity. Your weathered fence undermines the neighborhood experience." Paige had answered, "It's original cedar, maintained, and outside HOA control." Karen had smiled with only the front of her mouth. Control is such a harsh word. Influence is healthier. That line stayed in Paige's file because it captured the whole pattern. Karen rarely checked documents herself. She substituted posture for proof, social pressure for jurisdiction. She took photos through fence slats with her phone angled high, then forwarded them to board members as objective records. She spoke loudly enough for nearby porches to hear, because an audience was her favorite legal theory. If someone asked a direct question about boundaries, she changed lanes to values, aesthetics, or public safety optics. She wasn't afraid of being wrong. She was incurious about whether she was wrong. By the third week of May, Karen's friendly reminders had shifted into written warnings printed on HOA letterhead with bold headers and underlined deadlines. Paige showed Moreno the first notice. Property condition alert. Declining oak in visual corridor. There was no arborist assessment attached, no county code citation, no survey reference. Just a demand that Paige submit a hazard mitigation plan to the HOA Architecture Committee within 7 days. I responded same day, Paige said, turning to her own letter clipped behind it. Not in jurisdiction, tree under professional observation, communication in writing only. Karen leaned forward, voice rising. You omitted that her tree looked visibly distressed and residents felt unsafe. Paige looked at Moreno. Feelings were included, authority wasn't. The older deputy murmured, "Keep going." Paige did. She moved to the next tab and laid out the first fine notice. $450 labeled Nuisance Non-Compliance Penalty, due in 10 days, with late fees after that. Karen had signed it in thick blue ink and added a handwritten line in the margin. Board may pursue additional remedies, including forced abatement. Moreno frowned. Forced abatement on adjacent non-member parcel? Karen snapped. When hazards affect shared access, we have emergency powers. Where's that from? Moreno asked. Karen flipped pages on her clipboard without finding anything. Section 12. Paige slid a printed copy of the Willow Pine Shores Covenant excerpt across the table. Section 12 applies to member lots within plat boundaries. Parcel 11B is not listed. County map attached at tab C. Karen's cheeks colored under her makeup. She crossed her arms and stared at the road, chin high like a person waiting for a better audience to arrive. 3 days passed before the certified letter came. Paige handed Moreno the green return receipt card and the letter itself, creased at the folds. It threatened Leanne proceedings for unpaid fines and warned that refusal to permit HOA contractors for hazard work could trigger escalated enforcement protocols. There was a law firm logo at the top, but no attorney signature at the bottom, only an electronic stamp and Karen's typed name beneath. Paige had called the firm's public intake line that afternoon, logged the call at 2:17 p.m., and asked whether they represented the HOA in active litigation over Parcel 11B. The receptionist said she could not comment and took a message for records review. Outcome? Moreno asked. Paige turned one page. 48 hours later, I got an email from the firm's compliance clerk. They had issued no legal filing against me and advised all future correspondence should be directed through verified counsel. That email is at tab D. Karen's nails started tapping again, faster now. Administrative process can involve templates. Paige gave a small nod. Template threats are still threats. By early June, the pattern moved from paper to trespass photography. One afternoon at 6:42 p.m., motion alerts from Paige's fence camera showed 2 HOA landscaping committee volunteers standing inside her side gate, taking close pictures of the oak's root flare and soil line. Neither had permission. One of them held Karen's clipboard while the other pushed mulch aside with the toe of his shoe and said, "Clear on audio." She won't know this part was compacted already. Moreno stopped writing and looked up. They entered your enclosed yard? Yes. Karen cut in, sharp and quick. That gate was unlatched and they were documenting a community hazard. On private property, the older deputy said. Karen turned toward him with performative patience. Officer, with respect, adjacent conditions can create collective liability. Paige reached to the folder sleeve and drew out still frames with timestamps printed in the corner. Collective liability does not erase trespass. The second fine arrived the next morning, this one for $725, marked repeat noncompliance and obstruction. It added a charge for refusal to attend compliance conference. Paige had never been given a lawful conference notice. She had one voicemail from Karen at 9:11 p.m. the prior evening saying, "Show up tomorrow at 10 by the clubhouse fountain or consequences escalate." Paige preserved the voicemail, transcribed it, and sent a written reply at 6:03 a.m. requesting formal notice with legal basis. No response came. The fine did. By mid-June, the sun had baked the clay hard enough to crack along the driveway edge, and Karen's posture turned openly punitive. She stopped asking and started announcing. At 8:19, one morning, she drove up in the golf cart, stepped onto the gravel in polished flats that sank at the heel, and read from her clipboard without greeting. "You have now triggered board-level enforcement and emergency welfare review due to neglected hazardous conditions." Paige had stood by the porch rail with a hose in one hand and said, "Emergency welfare for a tree." Karen had pointed the clipboard at her like a baton. "For occupants who may be in distress and unable to maintain safe property." There it was, the pretext she had been circling. 2 days later, at 6:58 a.m., dispatch called Paige directly before sending units because there had been a welfare concern report linked to possible self-neglect and dangerous conditions on the premises. The dispatcher sounded apologetic. Paige logged the call, gave her name, stated she was safe, and invited a welfare check anyway, so the record would be clean. Deputies arrived, confirmed no emergency, and cleared in under 12 minutes. Paige offered both officers bottled water in the heat and asked one factual question: who filed the report? The answer was withheld at scene, but the case summary she obtained later through records request listed HOA, complainant contact, K. Langford. Moreno exhaled slowly through his nose and rubbed the edge of the complaint form with his thumb. Karen spoke fast, words tumbling now. "I acted out of concern. This community expects leadership." "Concern documented as self-neglect," Paige said, after 2 disputed fines and a failed access demand. The older deputy looked at Karen. "Ma'am, that sequence matters." By the first week of July, Paige had installed 2 additional cameras at the side yard and one facing the well house path, not hidden, plainly posted with small signs at both gates. Video monitoring in use. She mailed notice of surveillance to the HOA board by certified post and copied county code enforcement so nobody could claim surprise. Karen responded with an email accusing Paige of hostile optics and intimidation architecture. Paige filed it. A week later came the night entry. It was 11:37 p.m., hot and windless, the kind of dark where every mechanical sound carries. Paige woke to the low grind of a compact trencher and saw moving light through the side window. She did not run outside. She called the non-emergency line first, then opened her camera feed on the kitchen monitor. 2 workers in HOA contractor shirts were cutting a shallow arc trench near the oak strip line and applying liquid from unlabeled pump sprayers along the cut. A pickup parked on the shoulder had temporary magnetic signs for Langford Landscape Solutions, the vendor Karen had pushed at 2 board meetings as our preferred rapid response team. One worker said, picked up clearly on audio, "Do the full ring." Karen said, "Root interruption now, then we can justify removal." Paige felt her jaw set, but her hand stayed steady. She recorded the live feed to a separate drive, photographed the screen with a timestamp app, and kept dispatch on speaker until a patrol unit rolled by and the workers left through her unapproved side gate access. No arrests that night. Names documented. Plate recorded. Incident number assigned. By sunrise, she had flagged the trench line with survey paint. covered sample points, and called an independent lab in the county seat. Soil samples were collected under chain of custody protocol at 9:26 a.m. She also called a master arborist from 2 counties over, a man she trusted precisely because he did not know Karen and had no stake in Willow Pine Shores politics. He inspected the site at 4:40 p.m., documented fresh root zone cuts inconsistent with routine care, and noted chemical burn patterning around feeder root areas. His preliminary note ended with one sentence Page had read 3 times before filing. Decline progression appears induced by recent anthropogenic disturbance, not natural senescence. Karen's response came at 7:12 the next morning, delivered by hand on HOA letterhead. She stood at the gate in her hat and pearls, sunglasses reflecting Page's porch like dark mirrors, and read aloud as if serving judgment. Given obvious tree death and urgent hazard conditions, HOA authorized abatement will proceed, and all costs will be assessed to property occupant for failure to mitigate. Page had stayed on the porch and said, "You harmed the tree and sent me the bill." Karen gave a tight smile. "You cannot prove causation." Page remembered that line now and slid one final page in front of Moreno. Invoice copy from Langford Landscape Solutions, billed to Willow Pine Shores, dated the night of the trenching, with line items for root zone trench, vegetation management chemical application, and hazard prep mobilization at parcel adjacent 11B perimeter. The company stamp matched the pickup on camera. Moreno stared at the page, then at Karen. The older deputy took out his radio and stepped toward the road for better signal. Karen finally removed her sunglasses, and for the first time, her eyes looked less certain than her outfit. "This is being taken out of context," she said, voice thinner now. "We were protecting community interests." Page rested her palm on the closed folder sleeve, where the service agreement sat waiting, and answered in the same level tone she had used all morning. "You escalated from suggestions to fines, from fines to false authority, from false authority to night work in my yard. I documented each step. That's the context." The red and blue lights continued to pulse across the gravel, but the scene had changed shape. The deputies were no longer asking whether Page belonged on her own porch. They were mapping how far Karen had stepped past the line. Then Karen did the worst thing she had done yet. She raised her phone, glanced toward the road, and said, loud enough for all 3 deputies and 2 waking neighbors to hear, "Proceed with emergency abatement. Law enforcement is on scene." A diesel engine answered from the bend by the entrance monument. A white flatbed rolled into view, pulling a stump grinder and a small chipper, both already dusted with old saw chips. Behind it came a second pickup with magnetic door signs for Langford Landscape Solutions, and a man in a hard hat, standing in the bed, holding orange cones like flags. The truck slowed at Page's gate, idled, then nudged forward as if this were a scheduled utility call and not a contested trespass complaint. Deputy Moreno held up his hand. "Nobody enters until we sort jurisdiction." Karen ignored him and snapped open a second folder from under her clipboard. "This is hazard authorization from the board. This tree is dead. We are mitigating imminent risk." Her manicured nail tapped a page with a signature block and a bold line that read, "Cost Recovery Land Processing." If she interferes, note obstruction. Page felt the old triage steadiness settle in, the one that arrived when noise spiked and facts mattered more than pulse. She stepped off the porch at last, boots hitting gravel with a sound that carried clean in the morning heat. She did not hurry. She did not raise her voice. She walked straight to the side gate and slid the iron latch closed with a calm click that sounded louder than Karen's shouting. "This gate stays shut," Page said. Karen turned red along her cheekbones. Deputy, you see this? Active obstruction of emergency work. The older deputy came back from the road's shoulder, radio still in his hand. Dispatch is pulling parcel overlays now, he said to Moreno, then looked at the trucks. Kill the saws and stay in your vehicles. One of the contractors leaned out his window. Ma'am told us this was HOA land. Page met his eyes, not unkind. You were told wrong. At 7:31 a.m., with the sun clearing the pine tops and the patrol lights still washing the gravel in red and blue sweeps, Karen took one step toward the gate and raised her clipboard like a warrant. That oak threatens hydrant visibility and pedestrian safety. We have emergency authority in the corridor. Show the corridor on a county map, Moreno said. Karen flipped pages again, faster this time, papers catching in the metal clip. She found a stylized subdivision diagram with walking trails and decorative icons for benches and flower beds. No parcel numbers, no county stamp, no meets and bounds. She held it out anyway. This is the approved community plan. Page watched Moreno glance at it and hand it back without comment. Karen's jaw tightened. Fine, here. She thrust the lean page toward him. We can recover costs through civil filing if owner refuses mandatory hazard remediation. Page took a breath through her nose and looked at the lien form. The legal description line listed Parcel 11B, but someone had typed HOA Common Corridor in parentheses after it, as if adding words could alter recorded title. The amount field was already filled in. $6,980. Removal, grinding, haul-off, restoration, administrative surcharge. She turned to Moreno. Deputy, that amount was pre-filled before your arrival. They plan to cut first and argue later. Karen swung toward Page, voice climbing. We plan to protect residents after months of your neglect. By trenching my root zone at night, Page said, then billing me for the decline. Karen barked a short laugh with no humor in it. Speculation. Page looked to the clear sleeve on the cedar table. She had kept her hand near it all morning, and now she reached for it, lifting out 2 stapled packets and 1 folded map with a county recording stamp in purple ink. She held them like tools she trusted. Deputy Moreno, she said, I want these logged in your incident notes and photographed in place. 1 is a recorded infrastructure license. 1 is an independent toxicology report with chain of custody. 1 is the contractor's own work order line items from the night entry. Karen's posture changed by a fraction, then corrected. This is irrelevant to immediate hazard action. Page unfolded the map on the hood of the patrol SUV so the sunlight hit every line. It is the only thing relevant. The map showed Willow Pine Shores from the county recorder's office perspective, not the HOA's glossy version. Lot blocks sat in pale gray. Easements were hatched. At the bottom edge, Parcel 11B stood in bold boundary lines. A blue route ran from Page's permitted well house to the entrance median, then branched to sprinkler mains and the fire loop booster manifold near the clubhouse hydrant bank. Across the top, in block letters, read Private Water and Fire Loop Supply License Agreement. Recorded Instrument 19-4472. Moreno bent close. The older deputy stepped beside him. Even one contractor got out of his truck far enough to squint at the page. Page pointed to Clause 4. Willow Pine Shores receives non-exclusive use of my well output for entrance irrigation and booster feed, under discounted private rate. She pointed to Clause 9. License is revocable for material breach, including unauthorized entry, property damage, and false claims of ownership over grantor land. She moved to Exhibit C. This is the corridor Karen keeps saying is HOA emergency property. It is not theirs. It is mine, and they're on a revocable license through my system. Karen's lips parted. For a second, nothing came out. The older deputy looked up first. Ms. Langford, is your entrance hydrant booster tied to this line? Karen recovered volume without regaining ground. Our infrastructure team manages utilities. I'm not an engineer. Page gave a small nod. But you've been benefiting from this agreement for 3 years. The board requested renewal language last spring. You signed the cover email. Moreno turned to Karen. Did you know your fire loop depends on her well permit? Karen's sunglasses were off now, and her eyes darted to the trucks, to the clipboard, to the 2 neighbors standing by the mailbox across the road, pretending not to listen. We have community systems in place, she said. This is intimidation. Page set down the map and opened the second packet. This is intimidation. She handed Moreno the independent arborist report, then the lab toxicology page behind it. Collected under chain of custody on July 9th at 9:26 a.m. Compounds detected in the root zone soil include triclopyr ester and a high-load glyphosate surfactant blend, not used in my maintenance records. Root interruption, documented at fresh cut depth within feeder zone. Causation opinion, induced decline consistent with recent mechanical trenching and chemical exposure. Moreno skimmed, then slowed and read aloud one line. Pattern not consistent with natural senescence. Page placed the third packet on the hood. And this is Langford Landscape Solutions invoice, billed to the HOA, same night as recorded entry. Item 3 reads root zone trench and vegetation management chemical application. Parcel adjacent 11B perimeter. The contractor by the truck looked at his boots. We did what dispatch from office told us. Karen snapped toward him. Get back in the vehicle. The older deputy keyed his radio and requested a supervisor and property crimes unit for documentation, then asked dispatch to contact County Fire Administration regarding booster dependency on instrument 19-4472. His tone stayed neutral, but he had moved from neighborhood mediation to evidence preservation. Karen tried one more pivot. Even if that agreement exists, we still had emergency authority to remove a dangerous tree. Page answered with the same even cadence she had used all morning. No, ma'am. You had a discounted license, a clipboard, and a choice. You chose trespass. Moreno straightened and faced Karen directly. At this point, nobody from your crew is entering that gate. We are documenting possible unauthorized entry, property damage, and false reporting tied to today's trespass complaint. Karen's face went pale under the makeup, then flushed again in patches. Her mouth opened and closed once, like she was searching for the boardroom script and finding none. The older deputy's radio cracked with dispatch response from Fire Administration. He listened, then repeated for the record. Confirmed. Willow Pine Shores entrance sprinklers and hydrant booster are fed by private licensed source at Bennett Well House pending compliance upgrades. No city main backup currently active. One neighbor across the road made a soft, involuntary sound of surprise. Karen heard it. She heard the contractors hear it too. Page did not smile. She did not gloat. She only pulled one more page from the clear sleeve, a short type notice with blank date line and signature block already prepared. Deputy, for your report. This is notice of temporary suspension of discounted water delivery under Clause 9 pending council review and safety compliance. Service for fire protection remains as required by county emergency protocol. Decorative irrigation does not. Karen stared at that page like it had crossed a line she did not know existed. You can't shut down our entrance. I can suspend discounted landscaping flow under the agreement you depended on while trying to lien my land, Page said. And I can do it lawfully. Moreno nodded once. Ms. Bennett, keep that copy ready for supervisor intake. The chipper sat silent. The chainsaws stayed in their racks. The hazard crew that had arrived to cut Page's tree in front of her and hand her the bill now waited behind their own windshield glass, watching the woman they were sent to overrun stand with a stamped map on a patrol hood and a calm voice that never climbed above conversation. Karen clutched her clipboard tighter, but the performance had slipped. Without the shouting, she looked smaller, a woman in pearls on gravel trying to hold authority by habit while every document on scene said otherwise. Page gathered the packets back into order. Red tab against clear sleeve, report behind map, copies clipped for deputies. She had promised Thomas she would keep the place theirs. She had promised Earl she would keep it right. On that hot morning by the gate, with the oak standing damaged but not yet removed, she kept both promises in the plainest way she knew. Names, dates, paper, and the truth doing its own work. The supervisor's Tahoe rolled in at 7:46, dust curling behind it, and Sergeant Dana Halverson stepped out with a clipboard that looked official in a way Karen's never had. She listened for less than 2 minutes before she split the scene into tasks. One deputy photographed the gate latch, the trench ring, and the oak's cut feeder roots. Another took statements from both contractors beside the idling chipper. Moreno stood at Page's shoulder and logged each document as Page handed it over in order. County stamped survey packet, recorded instrument 19-4472. Independent Arborist report, lab toxicology results with chain of custody signatures. Still frames from the fence cameras, and the Langford landscape invoice with line items that matched the night footage. Karen kept trying to step back into the middle. Sergeant, this is a civil misunderstanding. We need to proceed with hazard work. Halverson did not raise her voice. Ma'am, you can speak when I ask you a question. Right now you are the reporting party on a trespass complaint that appears to conflict with county records. That shut Karen down for a beat. Not long, but long enough. The older deputy finally gave Page the thing he had been holding back since the first call. I should have said this sooner, he told Halverson, then glanced to Page with an apologetic tilt of his head. I'm volunteer with Station 4. We drill those willow pine hydrants every spring. Pressure has always been tagged as private booster feed. I recognized the well house parcel number when she unfolded that map. Karen snapped toward him. Why was that not disclosed immediately? He met her square. You were talking over everybody. By 9:12, every physical item had a destination. The deputies photographed originals in place, scanned copies into the incident file, and sealed a digital copy of Page's camera footage on a department drive with receipt number 24-771C. The soil sample chain logs were attached to property crimes intake. The stylized HOA diagram Karen had presented as jurisdiction proof was photographed, marked non-record illustrative exhibit, and returned to her clipboard. The pre-filled lien form was logged as attempted civil enforcement evidence and copied for the county attorney's review. At 10:03, Halverson called dispatch in front of both parties and asked for 2 callbacks. County code verification on Parcel 11 B status and records confirmation on the welfare pretext caller tied to the June report. Both came back before 10:20. Parcel 11B remained non-member and grandfathered. Welfare report origin listed K. Langford as complainant contact. Karen's sunglasses were in her hand by then, and she kept rotating one arm of the frame between her fingers, like she needed something solid that would still obey her. Page stood by the patrol hood, not triumphant, just steady. Sergeant, I'm serving notice now under Clause 9. She slid the prepared page across and signed it on the hood. Pen strokes neat despite the heat. Decorative irrigation flow from my well is suspended at noon today due to material breach. Unauthorized entry, chemical damage, and false ownership claims. Fire protection baseline remains active until county signs off on alternate source. Halverson read it once and nodded. Reasonable and specific. Karen found her volume again. You cannot hold the neighborhood hostage over one tree. Page turned to her, calm as shade. You treated my land like a prop and my records like a bluff. This is not hostage-taking. This is contract enforcement. At 11:40 that same morning, the emergency board meeting filled the Willow Pine clubhouse with folding chairs and the smell of burnt coffee. Paige sat at the end of the front row in work boots, red tab binder on her lap. Karen stood by the projector screen with her pearls and white clipboard, trying to recover ground with procedural words. But then the HOA insurer's conflict analyst joined by speakerphone, and the room changed shape. We've reviewed the incident packet, the analyst said, voice flat and professional over the wall speaker. Coverage is reserved pending misconduct determination. Immediate directives. Cease all enforcement activity on Parcel 11B. Void both nuisance fines, withdraw lien threat. Preserve all internal communications, and suspend President Langford from unilateral contracting authority. Karen stared at the speaker as if it had betrayed her personally. Suspend based on unverified accusations? Paige opened her binder and placed 3 copies on the board table. Lab report, contractor invoice, and the email from the law firm compliance clerk disclaiming active filing authority. Verified enough for timestamps, signatures, and your vendor's own bill. The vice president, a soft-spoken man named Trent Holloway, who had barely spoken at prior meetings, finally looked straight at Karen and asked the question nobody else had asked in 3 years. Did you verify jurisdiction before issuing fines? Karen's mouth tightened. I verified community impact. That's not what I asked, he said. She did not answer. The silence sat there in front of everyone and never yielded. By 1:15 p.m., the board secretary read the motions into the record, one after another, voice shaking but clear. Motion 1, all fines against Paige Bennett voided and expunged. Motion 2, formal withdrawal of hazard abatement action. Motion 3, acceptance of external legal counsel to negotiate remediation and damages. Motion 4, interim removal of Karen Langford as acting president, pending misconduct review under Article 8. The vote was 4-1. Karen's hand was the one no. Paige didn't clap. She didn't smile. She signed the attendance sheet, accepted a stamped copy of the minutes, and walked out into the bright heat where the entrance sprinklers were still running on the final minutes before noon. At 11:59, she stood in her well house, hand on the valve wheel Earl had installed, and watched the pressure gauge settle. At noon exactly, she turned off decorative flow to the subdivision's entrance loop. Across the road, Willow Pine's fountain sputtered once and fell quiet. The flower bed misters cut out. The polished front median, the one Karen had used in every speech about standards, sat still and dry in plain daylight. Fire loop baseline remained active, exactly as promised. 3 days later, County Council hosted the compliance session in a cinder block conference room that smelled faintly of toner and old paper. Paige sat with her attorney, Mr. Harden, suspenders and all. Across from them sat Trent, the HOA's new interim chair, and an outside engineer with 3 binders of upgrade plans. Karen was present only as a non-voting homeowner, seated in the back with no clipboard, no pearls, no podium voice. She never met Paige's eyes. Terms were read aloud and signed in sequence. Commercial metered rates for all non-emergency water use, effective immediately. Full reimbursement for oak value and site remediation, including root zone soil rehabilitation and replacement planting. Payment of Paige's attorney fees. Indemnity language for future claims tied to HOA contractors. Mandatory proof of alternate municipal backup line within 60 days or permanent decorative flow limitations. Personal contribution review for Karen under the HOA misconduct clause, to be handled by their insurer. Every call Paige had logged, every email she had preserved, every report number she had written down found its place in those pages. No one argued once the numbers were on paper. 10 days after the porch confrontation, the board met again at dusk. Chairs scraped, ballots were counted, and Karen Langford was removed as president by formal vote and recorded resignation from all enforcement committees. Paige did not attend that meeting. She was at home with neutral gloves and a shovel, kneeling in the softened edge of the side yard where the trench damage had been remediated, setting a white oak sapling into fresh soil. The sapling came from one of Earl's acorns she had started in a nursery pot 2 springs earlier, long before any of this. By the second week of October, the road had gone back to ordinary. No golf cart idling at her mailbox, no cream envelopes tucked under the gate latch, no friendly reminders on heavy paper. The contractor trucks that came to Willow Pine now stopped at the boundary signs, checked maps, and called ahead before they touched anything near her fence. One even knocked and asked, polite as church, "Ma'am, can you confirm this marker before we trench?" Paige walked out, confirmed, and thanked him for asking. That evening, she sat in the cedar rocking chair with a flannel over her shoulders and watched the last light slide across the gravel drive. The wind chime moved once, a low metal note, and settled. The damaged old post oak had been professionally removed under her own contractor's plan, stump ground clean, wood milled into 2 bench planks now curing in the barn. Nothing abandoned, nothing left unresolved. The incident binders were sealed and stored in the office cabinet. The evidence receipt from 24-771C sat clipped to the inside cover. The county's final closure memo was filed behind it. The gate stayed quiet through sunset. No patrol lights, no shouted standards. Just cicadas beginning in the tree line and the faint hiss of her own irrigation line, watering the new white oak at a measured rate. Paige leaned back, boot heel tucked under, coffee warm in both hands, and looked toward the well house where her grandfather had taught her that slow growth made strong wood. She had not wanted to dominate anybody. She had wanted to be left alone on the land her family built, the land her husband asked her to keep, the land she had tended in dawn light for years. In the end, she got exactly that. Boundaries respected, contracts corrected, damages paid, and quiet returned on lawful terms. When full dark settled over Willow Pine shores, the entrance fountain remained dry unless metered and paid for. The fire line stayed secure for emergencies, and Paige's porch held only what it had always been meant to hold. One steady chair, one honest breeze, and peace that no clipboard could overrule.